it's important that the church is being very specific with it and they're making the decision. Hey, we feel like God's calling us to do this, and therefore we're going to open up this fund for this purpose, broad enough so that they don't trap money there, but specific enough where people understand what they're giving to. That's part of that.
Well, hello and welcome to Distilled. Dan, how's it going?
I'm doing great. How about you?
Excellent. And I have a particularly difficult question for you this afternoon.
Kira, what is it? I'm scared.
If you coffee with any Bible villain without any repercussions, right? I mean, you're not going to get killed. You're not going to get maimed. They're not going to, throw a curse at you. Who would it be and why?
Wow. That's a really tough question. I think my mood would, I think I would answer this differently depending on my mood. But right now, actually, who comes to mind would be the Pharaoh in Egypt that had all the eggs, because it's like, what were you thinking to keep, holding the Israelites slaves with so many things happening, just understand really the thought process there. So that might not be my forever answer, but that's my right now answer.
Now that we've gotten the villains out of the way, what are we talking about today?
Well, speaking of villains, today we're talking about don't trap your cash. Don't tie up your cash in donor restrictions. There's something called donor restricted funds, and these are donations that have been earmarked by the donor for a specific purpose or use. So your only legal way to use those dollars is for the purpose that donor has set as part of making that donation.
So what are the challenges with donor restricted funds? Why is it a problem?
Yeah, right. Because you're like, hey, if people want to give me money, let's just take the money. Okay, right. First, this is something that pastors don't often even realize, that they're technically accepting a donor restricted fund. So they might be creating a legal obligation that they don't even realize. So that's one trick too. Yeah. We're not saying you should never do this, because there are good examples of this. Building fund is a very common and very good example. It's a very specific need. You're likely to use all of that money. There's probably a defined timeline, right? So if you need $10 million for a building and you're trying to raise $5 million, well, if you raise $4 million or you raise $6 million, you're probably still going to go forward with the project. It's not a problem that you raise the extra $1 million. That's great. You're just going to borrow less, right? But that's a really good time when churches do that. It's a very defined project. The challenge comes when it's less defined, and then the church may end up with money they can't use for the purpose that it was given. So this might be, you need $10,000 and you raise $25,000. If you're too specific, it locks you in. Or if you just let people give to different areas of need or ministry, you might have a bunch of money sitting in some category for some specific purpose, but that's not really what you need the money for right now. And you may not be able to spend it for that. We see it where churches they need $50,000 more in their budget, and they have that sitting in the account for some other purpose that they aren't spending it for right now. And so that's a trap that happens if you're not careful with this.
Wow. I hadn't even thought about that. Trapping them in certain ways where it's like, we need it for this, but we don't have access to that. So what are some best practices here?
You want to do it when it makes sense to do. Something like a building campaign where, again, it's kind of a defined project. It's a defined timeline that you're giving to a specific thing. They can be really effective. What you want to avoid is sometimes we'll look at giving pages for churches and there's like 25 different things you can give to. Not only are you now creating a whole bunch of things that you have to keep track of and then make sure dollars are spent, but you're also kind of putting the power in the donor's hands as to what money should be going to. And really, there might be time. I mean, of course, you want their input, but running a church, it's good to trust that the leaders, the pastors, that God's going to guide them on where to spend that dollar. So you want to have the dollars more in control of where the pastors and the elders and leaders feel like that money should be spent. And the other problem is, honestly, sometimes you even see people who want to donate to an organization almost get analysis paralysis when there's too many options of where to give to. And so they might pull it and see 25 options and think, man, I'm not even sure what's the most effective thing to give to. Whereas when you just have the general fund, they're now giving to the church and trusting that the church leadership is going to spend those dollars on what's most effective.
Kind of like me and Netflix on a Friday night. I'm like, oh, there's so many options. What do I do?
But exactly. What you're saying,
yeah, exactly.
Your time trying to pick the show, and then you fall asleep once the show starts, right?
Thank you. So really, it's a lose-lose. What I'm picturing you saying is I'm almost picturing a church as a ship in some ways. Go with me here. I'm seeing pastor leadership, that's the captain and like his closest confidants in the crew. They're the ones that have that mission and vision. They're the ones that have the direction of where this ship is meant to go. And I'm almost picturing in my head is when you're giving people 25 options and they can choose it at will. What if all of a sudden it's either going 25 different directions or it's going to a ministry that, yes, you care about, but it's not actually pushing your mission forward towards the generations or towards the missions or towards whatever your ship is going towards, then it's kind of trying to pull you off this way, which is not a bad thing, but maybe they should be on a different ship. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a great analogy. I mean, you want everyone going in the same direction. And if the ship wouldn't be as efficient if it's got multiple rudders trying to steer it, or people rowing left to right instead of forward to backwards, or kind of people who are rowing, so to speak, but the oars are up in the air and they're not in the water, which would be kind of the idea of like they're giving to something that's just going to sit in the bank account. I think it's a great analogy. And unfortunately, I think it's the trap. Oh, they want to give to this because it's important to them. So we'll let them do it. But you start to find that you've got all these funds, you got all these dollars, but they're not really helping propel the ship forward. We're not saying you should never have a donor restricted fund that you should, ask for dollars for a specific thing. Again, building campaigns are very common. There's things with missions or other things where we see it all the time, and it's good. It's important that the church is being very specific with it and they're making the decision. Hey, we feel like God's calling us to do this, and therefore we're going to open up this fund for this purpose, broad enough so that they don't trap money there, but specific enough where people understand what they're giving to. That's part of that. They feel, there's a vision element to that, like with a building or something like that. But where you're controlling it, not just the donor says, hey, we're going to write a check and we want it to go to this. And we're going to write a check and we want it to go to this. You want to be controlling that from the church, from the leadership, and keeping it very limited and specific to the needs that God's calling your church to accomplish.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Okay, give it to me straight, Dan. What is one takeaway or action item every pastor needs to take from this episode?
Run away from donor restricted fund. No, I'm just kidding. Obviously, we've said be cautious with it, and I think that if you have them right now, I would review them and to see if they're still critical to your mission and vision. If you are giving people a lot of ways to give, or you're accepting a lot of different areas that you have these funds, really consider if they're really for your mission and vision, if they're being effective, or if there's other ways, if you stopped accepting dollars, that you could direct those dollars into more general things and more areas that you could use as a church. And then, again, I think if you have money that's just building up, that's probably a good sign that you don't need money for that area. And again, maybe do that with a building on a longer term scale. But if you have a ministry or something that it's like, let's try to talk to those people and see if they'll redirect the dollars that they're currently giving to something else. And there is a process you can go through to actually ask your donors and release that restriction. So that might even be something to consider. But I would say look at that if that's an area that you're doing, and really be specific with it.
And you can find out more at www.churchfinancemadesimple.com. We've got some great resources on there on this topic and many, many more. Thanks for joining us. We'll catch you next time.